Next to that epic disaster in South America, the death toll climbing after a devastating flash flood. The wall of water leveling a city as people slept in their beds, destroying homes, taking at least 200 lives. The grim list of the dead, you see it there, and so many of them children. Tonight, the desperate rush to get fresh water and supplies to the grieving survivors. ABC's Alex Marquardt on the tragedy in Colombia.
Devastation and despair tonight, deep in the Amazon basin. Rescue crews frantically digging through the muddy rubble, trying to locate anyone who may still be alive, listening for signs of life. One feels completely unable to express the magnitude of the loss here, this man said. Family members weeping over lists posted of Makoa's dead and missing children. We've lost a baby who's gone missing, this woman said. A little baby, we can't find him anywhere. The scale of the destruction from the avalanche of mud and water, staggering. Cars flung like toys, entire neighborhoods buried. The death toll tonight, at least 200, but with hundreds more still missing and injured, Colombian and aid officials expect it to grow. With water and power knocked out, obliterated roads and bridges hindering aid efforts, people trapped in flooded homes making desperate pleas to be rescued.
It is very difficult because many people do not have the surviving skills to let us know they're there.
Peru is facing the most serious floods in the last 20 years. Since December, flooding and mudslides have claimed at least 70 lives and left more than 100,000 people homeless there. As Ecuador holds a presidential election, some polling stations have been transformed into emergency shelters. In the most populous Guayas province, nearly half of the region suffers from flooding.
Well, on the other side of the globe, in Indonesia, another person has been found dead following a landslide caused by more unusually heavy rain. The landslide has now killed at least 11 and swallowed more than 20 homes on the island of Java. Rescuers say that dozens of people are still buried.
Officials are warning people to stay away from the crater of a volcano in central Japan. They say there may have been a minor eruption on Mount Asama. Officials with Japan's meteorological agency say there may have been a small volcanic eruption in the central part of the country. They say there are heavy clouds covering Mount Asama, but they have observed ash in the area. Now, this image was taken Tuesday morning from a camera installed on the west side of the volcano. Smoke can be seen rising from near the crater. The officials say staff at a facility about 4 kilometers north of the mountain found a small amount of ash. The more than 2,500-meter high volcano straddles Nagano and Gunma prefectures. Officials started to detect an increase of shallow quakes in late April. They recorded nearly 90 tremors on June 7th. They estimate 1,700 tons of the volcanic gas, sulfur dioxide, was released on June 11th. That's around 20 times more compared to surveys in May. The agency is maintaining its alert level at 2 on its scale of 5. Officials are warning people to keep out of a 2-kilometer area around the volcano's crater.
An earthquake with a preliminary magnitude of 6.6 has struck far east of Russia. The quake was measured at a depth of about 33 kilometers in the Bering Sea, just off the eastern coast of Kamchatka. The Sakhalin Tsunami Monitoring Center has issued a warning of possible waves of up to 1.5 meters.
Millions of people in the Deep South are in the path of dangerous weather. This was the frightening scene today as a tornado was spotted near Woodworth, Louisiana. Tornadoes, flash floods, devastating winds and hail are in the forecast tonight across Texas, Arkansas, Louisiana and Mississippi. The southern storms cap a weekend of severe weather in the U.S. At least 2 people are dead. Here's Tony DeCopel.
A suspected tornado toppled this mobile home near Lafayette, Louisiana on Sunday, killing a mother and her 3-year-old daughter inside, police said. Heavy rain, slashing winds, and hail as large as ping pong balls hammered homes and vehicles from Texas to Mississippi. Moist air, more typical of August than April, could bring flash floods with as much as 2 inches of rain falling an hour. Strong tornadoes remained a risk into Sunday night. In Dallas, about 40,000 basketball fans had to make new plans after the threat of violent storms forced NCAA officials to cancel outdoor events ahead of Sunday night's championship game. Worshippers at the Real Life Church in Chesapeake, Virginia, meanwhile, had to find a new place to pray after a tornado tore through on Friday. Further north, April Fool's Day snowstorms were no joke from Massachusetts to Maine, where more than a foot fell.
I'm all done with this. Ready for spring, ready for summer. Can't happen fast enough for me.
And this major severe weather outlook for the Gulf states will last through tonight. And aside from tornadoes, Rena, hail is the biggest worry. Some of the bigger chunks can fall at speeds estimated at up to 100 miles an hour.
Wow, you forget how dangerous hail can be. Thanks, Tony.
Anti-government protests have been held in Russia for the second straight weekend. The demonstrations against state corruption were held in Moscow and several other cities, although the numbers were notably smaller than the week before, when around 500 people were arrested. In the latest rallies, police said at least 31 had been detained. Last Saturday's demonstrations were prompted by main opposition leader Alexei Navalny, who was later arrested. The protesters are calling for Prime Minister Dmitry Medvedev to resign over corruption allegations.
The family of a Chinese man shot dead by French police last week have called for calm following a series of protests which have ended in violent clashes. The man's daughter told thousands of protesters on Sunday in central Paris that she was saddened by the prospect of further violence. Me and my family would be sad to see violence happen and that people who are supporting us are injured or arrested. Don't risk your life for justice. Because I was born in France, I believe that this country of justice will bring justice to my father and to my family. Later, a group of around 300 tried to break through a police line and were met with tear gas.
Violent clashes between riot police and the Chinese community has rocked Paris for days. Yet, for some reason, this hasn't been picked up by the mainstream media. After monitoring coverage on networks such as the BBC and CNN, we asked them why they didn't want the protests in the French capital in their bulletins. Only the BBC responded. So, what did they cover instead? Well, Syria, Brexit, Trump's travel ban, Ivanka Trump to serve as an unpaid presidential advisor, the U.S. Senate's probe into Russian meddling with the U.S. election. And, interestingly enough, both networks interviewed people who attended last week's anti-government protest in Moscow. Some say choosing to give airtime to an old protest in Moscow, but not a current one in Paris, shows channels have a narrative they are determined to follow.
In France and probably in other European countries, let's say that there is a kind of Russia-phobia. I don't know why, but our mainstream media focuses a lot on the issues in Russia and not on the good sides.
Amid simmering social unrest in Paraguay, the president has sacked the interior minister and chief of police. The dismissals followed the fatal shooting of a young protester after officers entered the headquarters of the opposition Liberal Party. 4 police officers have since been arrested. Any act that leads to the death of a young person is unjustifiable and a significant calamity. I offer my most sincere condolences to the family of Rodrigo Quintana. Rest assured, these acts will not go unpunished. Everyone responsible for this horrendous episode will face justice and will pay for what they've done. Violent protests, including the storming and burning of Congress, broke out over proposed constitutional changes that would allow the president to run for a second term in office. Re-election was outlawed in 1992, 3 years after the fall of a brutal dictatorship. There are fears of a return to scenes such as these if the lower house votes on the amendment next week.
And now in Venezuela, angry demonstrators clash with police at the capital, Caracas. The protesters rallied to denounce what they called President Nicolas Maduro's recent attempt to expand his powers. They're carrying anti-government signs which read "Socialism of Hunger" and "We will rescue freedom." Development comes after a Supreme Court passed a bill to strip the National Assembly of its legislative powers.
Clashes on the streets of Ecuador as supporters of the right-wing presidential candidate claim fraud in Sunday's ballot. Former banker Guillermo Lasso is set to face narrow defeat, but has already announced he disputes the result, calling for a recount. There was confusion among supporters of Lasso. He started to celebrate after exit polls showed he would be the likely winner. But as more results came in, the balance tipped. The victor in these elections will replace President Rafael Correa, who's been in office for 3 terms. The leftist government candidate Lenin Moreno, who was supported by the outgoing president, has claimed victory. A Lasso defeat would be a relief for the WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange, whom Lasso had promised to remove from the Ecuadorian embassy in London.
Thousands of Hungarian and foreign students are demanding the government withdraws legislation which could force a university founded by philanthropist George Soros out of the country. Hungary's parliament is due to debate a bill which sets out new restrictions proposed by Prime Minister Viktor Orban, who is a critic of liberal civil organisations funded by Soros. The Central European University awards diplomas recognised both in the US and Hungary for its doctoral courses in social sciences.
A mother's anguish over the death of her only son. He was one of the 20 victims of the attack on Saturday night. The custodian of the Sufi shrine in Punjab province is believed to have stabbed and killed those at the shrine with a blunt object. Some reports suggest he may have had several accomplices. The motive and details surrounding the mass killing remain unclear.
He invited devotees here. They performed dhamal. He intoxicated them last night. After that, he beat and tortured devotees to cleanse them. Due to this torture, they were killed.
An investigation is underway. The regional police chief has reportedly said the main suspect appears both paranoid and psychotic. Some witnesses say the violence may have been the result of a power dispute between 2 groups of caretakers over control of the shrine.
The Islamic State's second-in-command in Iraq, Ayad al-Jumaili, has reportedly been killed in an airstrike near Iraq's Syrian border. According to Iraqi state media, government jets also killed several other ISIL commanders in the region of Al-Qaim. However, the U.S.-led anti-Islamic State coalition says it is unable to confirm the reports.
U.S.-backed Syrian forces confirmed on Sunday that the group repelled a major counterattack by Islamic State militants in the town of Tabqa. Nearby, the country's largest dam stands as a key strategic target in the campaign to capture the city of Raqqa, the Islamic State's biggest stronghold. Jihan Sheikh Ahmad, spokesperson for the Syrian Democratic Forces, said militants were stepping up their resistance as forces got closer to the town and dam. Ahmad said, "Our forces are advancing. Islamic State are facing large difficulties, and so they are starting counterattacks."
Every day, civilians are fleeing from Mosul with whatever means they have. Entire families running for their lives. But once they reach the safe zone, they are separated. Women and children go straight to the camps, while the men have to go through a security check. Iraqi security forces have a list of 40,000 names of ISIL suspects, and they fear that some could sneak out of the battlefield hidden among the civilians. Kurdish authorities closely monitor the movement of those living in the camps. Anyone wanting to go out needs a permit, and only a few are granted.
Anyone who arrives here has to go through a screening process. They also have to submit their identity cards to the authorities here, who do a background check. They won't get them back until they return home.
The Kurds have their own list of suspects, compiled when ISIL occupied some of their territory. And officials at the camp say they have caught several infiltrators since the offensive in western Mosul started.
Yes, of course. We have found a good enough number of ISIL across camps. I can't give you the exact number, but any person suspected or accused of being ISIL affiliated will then be handed over to the headquarters.
We are all secret informants. Infiltration happens. When we came out of Mosul, we saw people who had joined ISIL and then left. They came with us to the camp, but someone reported them and they were taken away.
The battle for Mosul is entering its most difficult phase, and more fighters are expected to try to sneak out. Relying on tips from civilians is now important to stop ISIL from spreading further.
The knife-wielding terrorist who stabbed 3 Israelis on Saturday is being praised as a martyr by Palestinians on social media today. The teenage assailant was shot and killed by police in Jerusalem's Old City before he managed to kill anyone.
17-year-old Ahmad Jazal came to the Israeli capital from the West Bank village of Sebastia near Nablus. He took a smiling selfie of himself outside of the Dome of the Rock Mosque shortly before taking out his knife and stabbing 2 Jewish civilians, one of which is 18 and the other 20. The assailant then wounded a policeman who rushed to the scene but stopped the rampage by shooting the terrorist. All of the Israeli victims were taken to the hospital suffering light to moderate wounds.
Today, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu declared that the IDF's new intermediate-range missile defense system, David Sling, is now fully operational. The David Sling joins Israel's anti-air deterrence alongside the Iron Dome, used to shoot down small rockets from Gaza and Lebanon, and the Arrow missile system built to defend against Iranian intercontinental ballistic missiles. Speaking ahead of a ceremony marking the completion of the David Sling, Netanyahu was quoted as saying, quote, "This afternoon we are going to make the anti-missile defense system, David Sling, fully operational. It is important news. All of Israel's civilians have experienced the important achievement of the Iron Dome systems against strategic short-range missiles in the last campaign against Gaza." End quote. The David Sling was jointly developed and manufactured by the Israeli state-owned Rafael Advanced Defense Systems and the U.S. Raytheon Company.
This week in Washington, President Donald Trump will welcome his next head of state. Fresh off of a visit from the Prime Minister of Denmark, the president will meet with Egyptian President al-Sisi on Monday. A White House official says President Trump wants to use the visit to, quote, reboot a bilateral relationship and build on a strong connection the two presidents established when they first met in New York. Tensions were high between al-Sisi and the Obama administration. Since taking office, al-Sisi has been accused of imprisoning hundreds of thousands of political opponents and protesters. The White House says it chooses to handle sensitive matters like the imprisonment behind closed doors and praised al-Sisi's stance against terrorism in the region.
We are going to start with President Trump's new warning to North Korea and China. He says the US is more than willing to tackle Pyongyang alone if Beijing doesn't take action. His remarks come a matter of days before he's due to meet with his Chinese counterpart in Florida.
If China is not going to solve North Korea, the United States will. That was a short but strong message from U.S. President Donald Trump with regard to North Korea's nuclear weapons program, according to an exclusive interview with the Financial Times published Sunday. The president said China has great influence over the North and will either decide to help Washington with Pyongyang or not, adding it won't be good for anyone if China doesn't. When asked whether unilateral action would be successful, the U.S. president responded with a single word, totally. He declined to provide further details, telling the paper he didn't have to say any more. Trump's comments come 4 days before he hosts Chinese President Xi Jinping at his private Mar-a-Lago resort in Florida, and the U.S. leader is expected to push Xi on the North Korea issue. The U.S. ambassador to the United Nations, Nikki Haley, told ABC in an interview broadcast on Sunday that Washington will press China to take a stronger stance on the North's nuclear program. saying that UN resolutions have failed to stop the North from conducting nuclear missile tests. The UN envoy said Beijing must take definitive actions as the only country that can halt North Korea's nuclear ambitions. Former Defense Secretary Ashton Carter, however, said he doubted Beijing will cooperate due to its unique historical and economic relationship with the North. Carter added that all options should be on the table when it comes to protecting the U.S., while also warning that a preemptive strike on the North could lead to a very destructive second war on the Korean Peninsula.
President Trump's deputy national security advisor now saying North Korea could have the ability to hit the U.S. with a nuclear-armed missile before the end of President Trump's term. ABC's Bob Woodruff with a rare access inside North Korea tonight.
We arrive in this reclusive country at a time of rising tensions with the U.S. Our hosts make a point to show us the growing capital city of Pyongyang. But we hope to see something else, those sites where the North Koreans have launched missiles or tested a new rocket engine since President Trump took office.
We put in all sorts of requests to visit out here, the launch locations where the missiles are being launched. We asked if we can see those brand new rocket engines. We're not getting that, but they said they're going to take us skiing.
On the road deep into the countryside, we drive by workers walking in formation, then arrive as promised at North Korea's brand new ski mountain with all the trappings of a resort.
There's any other guests here, do you think, or we're the only ones?
Except it is eerily empty. The few people on the slopes skiing the patriotic music. Back in the capital, the top North Korean official for U.S. affairs grants us a rare interview, and we talk about Secretary of State Rex Tillerson's recent tough talk.
Let me be very clear. The policy of strategic patience has ended. All options are on the table.
Vice Foreign Minister Han Song-rol says he thinks the possibility of a preemptive strike against the country's nuclear program is strong, later adding, if you bring out a knife to attack us, we will take out a sword.
Mr. Han told me he's never met personally President Trump before, but he's read that he is a great businessman, and he heard that he's very unpredictable, which means he is preparing for everything.
We all do it. Facebook. Once the easiest way to catch up on your friends' kids or see your college buddies' travel pics, has now turned into a place for, well, venting, and worse, name-calling and bullying.
Well, I don't think that we as a society realized how impactful a social media post could be.
An Asheville woman knows all too well. She was sued for what she posted.
I think that people today don't recognize the importance and the power of their words. Just because it is very easy to get your thoughts out there does not mean that you should.
The lawsuit filed in Superior Court claims that in a Facebook post relating to someone she knew, Jacqueline Hammond posted, quote, "I didn't get drunk and kill my kid." The woman had lost her son decades ago in a gun accident involving another little boy, but had nothing to do with his death, so she sued.
You can get in trouble anytime you make a false statement about someone else that damages their character or their reputation.
Truth is a defense to libel, but since it wasn't true, the case settled, with Hammond having to pay out a whopping $500,000 for what she posted.
Makes you think.
Nisha Pai runs the Pai networking group in Charlotte, most of it on Facebook, and says she is very careful about what's posted.
It is my group and therefore my reputation. So I don't want people posting, just going crazy, posting stuff.
Charlotte attorney Missy Owen says that's a good idea.
Anybody who learns about this case should think twice before angrily posting on their Facebook page about somebody else if what they have to say is not true.
Come on. Come on, girl. Good job, buddy. Good job.